Please note that the following content is not for children and may contain mild swearing and adult subject matter. Viewer discretion is always advised. Hello everyone, my name is Emily, and before I really get into the meat of this video, I want to issue a few really important disclaimers. Years ago, my grandmother had actually suggested I use her and my grandpa's remains in a painting. I was telling her about how you could take someone's ashes and put them into tattoo ink, and we ended up on the subject of putting ashes into like watercolors or just India ink to create a painting instead of a tattoo. Her words were, "Oh, that would be so lovely. That way your grandpa and I could be together forever with you, keeping our eye on you." Those were her actual words. Like, that's just how my grandma was. The jokester personality in me comes from my mom, which comes from my grandma, trust. But that ended up being an idea that really stuck with me, taking their ashes and turning them into art. And I know there's going to be a few people that feel what I'm doing is disrespectful and you are completely entitled to your opinion. I also realize it could be viewed as disrespectful in different cultures as well. And again, if that's the case, then this video just might not be for you, and that's totally fine. But I know that if my grandparents could somehow communicate with me right now, they would love this. It's a way to keep part of their physical selves together, to further eternalize that deep bond that they shared. Though I do realize there is nothing I could ever create that could truly emulate the love they had for one another. But for me, it's a way to have them close and to remember them in a way that is special to the bond I shared with them. So that's what this is. I'd also really love to share some of their story with you guys because I know it will resonate with a lot of you, and you guys will have stories of mentors or grandparents past that we'd all really love to hear. So if you have something that you'd feel comfortable contributing, like a story or a little anecdote, I'd love to see it in the comments. So on a technical side of things, I kind of have to do a little tonal shift here. I obviously couldn't use much of their ashes, otherwise it would dry out the ink. So I decided to use a small amount of each of them and use a mortar and pestle to grind their ashes into a really fine powder. Now, when a body is cremated, it's burned at ridiculously high temperatures, so the ashes are sterile. However, I don't want to be breathing in little shards of bone and whatnot, so I did wear a mask off camera. Also, as a side note, I was given grandma's ashes in a Gladware container because that is just how I received her. I have a more permanent box for both of them to live in, but I'm still finishing the paint job on it. I'm kind of customizing it, just letting everyone know so they don't think I just threw grandma in a Gladware container. I also think if she were still around, she'd think that was just like absolutely hilarious. Like, oh, okay, so I get the crummy old Gladware container, but grandpa gets the medical container. And then to which I would see my grandpa saying, "Hey, I ended up in a pea cup, don't complain." Like, I can literally hear them in my head. But anyway, okay. Before we get into the heavy, let's hear a word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online community for those of us who love to learn at any level. Skillshare is a huge collective of tens and thousands of different classes for every different genre of creative learning. You can check out everything from music to photography, web design, and my personal favorites, fine art and illustration. Being a mom to a little wild thing with another one on the way, I really don't have a lot of spare time. But that doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my creativity and desire to learn. Thankfully, most of Skillshare's classes are under 60 minutes and packed full of useful tools to help me get started on a new skill. What's also really great is their classes are affordable, much more inexpensive than any in-person option. I just wrapped up another class by Dylan Mierzwinski called Illustrating Flowers and Arranging Bouquets in Photoshop. I love Dylan's unique style of floral art and deeply admire the way she's able to create such intricate yet simple, eye-catching pieces. Being a part of her class was really helpful as I was able to easily apply what I had learned back into my own art. Check out the link in the description to get 2 free months of Skillshare Premium. Come and start your creative journey today. Explore with Skillshare. So let me start out by saying my grandparents are my whole world, and of course I was devastated when they passed away. My grandmother is the reason I got into traditional art. She was an incredible artist, and I wish I had more of her work in my collection. Hey guys, let me take 2 seconds out of this video to tell you that between my mom and I, we had a grand total of count 'em, one painting made by my grandma. Now, I did find her like notebook / sketchbook. It didn't really have any art in it, but it had a lot of her like techniques written down. I may go through some of her techniques in a separate video, but when I asked my mom, why don't we have any more artwork of grandma's, because grandma was such an amazing artist. And I guess it's because at some point in her adult life, she just felt like she wasn't any good as an artist and decided to throw all of her old artwork away. Anything that she made, she'd throw away. So I just shudder to think of all the times we sat down to draw or paint together and she'd just throw whatever she made away. And this is nobody's fault for not saving these things, because I don't think we realized it until after she passed away that all of her artwork, all of it that she'd ever created except for this one piece here, she threw away. And it breaks my heart in such a deep way because I sympathize so much with that emotion of not feeling like a good artist, just simply not feeling good enough, period. And I know that a lot of you guys have been there. So let's take this moment to take this as a lesson that one day someone is going to want to look at those things that you've created, even things you think aren't very good, and they're going to want to have those things to feel close to you and to cherish the memories that they had with you. So please, even if you don't think it's very good, don't throw your artwork away. Find a special place for it. But yeah, sorry for interrupting the flow of the video. It just really struck me and it made me sad, but I'm glad we have at least one painting of hers. We're very fortunate that we at least have that. Every time I'd see her, we'd spend hours drawing together. She showed me how to cross-hatch, how to draw from life, how to turn a sketch into a finished painting. I was captivated by her knowledge and how effortlessly she was able to create a beautiful work of art seemingly out of nowhere. I consider myself so deeply fortunate to have had the influence of an elder artist in my life, because although my mother is endlessly creative and crafty, she, in her own words, quote unquote, can't even draw a stick figure even if it were to save her life. Actually, funny little story. She was babysitting DeBabes, my son, the other day, and they were playing on his Magnadoodle. You know, they're the little gray boards with like the honeycomb patterns and the magnetic pen. And when you draw, you like draw with the little particles on screen and then you erase by like swiping the board. Those thingies. So they were playing with that. And obviously DeBabes always has me draw dinosaurs. So he asked my mom to draw a dinosaur, and what she drew, it looked like a dying hedgehog, but also an oven mitt at the same time. We laughed so hard about it. It was like one of those laughs where you're like cramping in the midsection. So I'll see if I can like recreate it, because what she made was simply like, it was just marvelous. Like, it was beautiful. And I secretly like want a stuffed animal made of it. It's like, but anyway, you get the picture. My grandma was the greatest influence in art that I had. In her final years, her hands got too shaky to hold a pencil, so it went from spending hours drawing together to just sitting together, and she would just watch me paint. She did some watercolor art when she was younger, but really preferred like chalk pastels, so she would always comment on how beautiful the watercolor blooms were, like when you touch the pigment to water and it just blooms like a flower, and that she always wished that she had worked more with watercolors when she had the chance. And I just really cherish those quiet moments. She would just sit next to me and I just feel her warmth, and I would just kind of draw whatever or paint whatever, and it was just nice. My grandmother actually outlived my grandfather for about a year, and we weren't really expecting her to, because she was always so delicate and fragile, where my grandfather was still fixing roof tiles when he was in like his late 80s. He was such a strong and proud man, as many men of that era were. He just absolutely refused to admit that his body was getting old or weak. He would never complain, and he'd often get really embarrassed or even a little irritable when someone would offer to help him in like any capacity. I remember he actually got kind of short with me for washing my own dish after dinner, because I was a guest in his house, and according to him, guests don't do dishes. And mind you, he was 92 and he was on a constant flow of oxygen. He couldn't stand without a walker, yet he still wanted to extend that common courtesy courtesy, even if that meant being in discomfort. That's the kind of man my grandfather was. A good handful of years ago, my grandfather had a quadruple bypass due to some severe heart issues. He ended up surviving the surgery, but he was left with an incredibly weak heart. He quadruple made up for it, though, by having literally the kindest heart. That's always where I saw the most strength in my grandfather, was in his compassion for all living things. His body became so weak and frail in the end, but his character never once faltered. You know, he was the mountain that would not bow. He was a first lieutenant in the Air Force during World War II, but back then it was actually a branch of the U.S. Army called the United States Army Air Corps, or USAAC. He actually went and enlisted, feeling an overwhelming sense of duty to his country and to others at such a critical time in our world's history. He became a pilot for the Air Corps and was eventually stationed in France. He typically flew cargo planes, and during one delivery mission to Germany, he got into an accident that would forever change his life. He was actually the co-pilot on this specific trip, which ended up being the thing that saved his life, but that same luck would also curse him with lifelong survivor's guilt. He and his pilot were in the plane, just sitting on the tarmac, when all of a sudden another plane behind them lost control after landing and couldn't stop in time. That plane ended up slamming into their plane, crushing the backside of it and causing the two pilot seats to fall out underneath the plane. The pilot, sitting only one seat away from my grandfather, was instantly crushed by the falling wreckage. Both my grandfather's legs were crushed, but he was still conscious and his whole upper body was still free and functioning. In that moment, he had to think very quickly because he knew the jet fuel was hemorrhaging and it could catch fire at any moment and set the whole area ablaze. He could either die trying to get his pilot's dead body out from under the wreckage or free his legs and attempt to crawl to safety, which could also be just as futile. Time wasn't a luxury he had in that moment, and with the thought of my grandmother in his head, he was able to free his legs from beneath the heavy metal remnants and crawl to safety. He ended up being the only survivor of that crash. He was then airlifted to a hospital in England where he received treatment for his legs, one being far worse off than the other. At the time, they were talking about possible amputation and telling my grandfather that he would probably never walk again, and unfortunately, back in that time, being disabled was heavily stigmatized. My grandfather told me they had to put live maggots on his legs in order for them to eat the dead and decaying skin off of them, which is a visual he said he will never ever forget. When he was finally able to get in touch with my grandmother, who was sick with worry back home in the States, he told her, "I'd understand if you'd want to divorce me, as I might soon become half of the man I used to be." To which my grandmother responded, "All I want from you is for you to get better and for you to come home to me." My grandparents were married for 76 years before they passed away. My mom always told me she never once saw them argue or fight. It was only ever love. It was a relationship that transcended time, money, worry, any petty thing. As long as they had each other, everything was going to be all right. My grandfather ended up making an almost full recovery, albeit with a little bit of a limp. And yes, he did come home to my grandmother. So here's looking at you, kids. So to avoid a total change in tone, I saved my discussion of the piece until the end of the video. I decided to use my grandparents' ashes both separately and together in this piece. While painting their caricatures, I used their respective ashes on their respective person, but when painting the background, I used the mixture of their ashes. So not only does it represent them as individuals, but also as one. And that's really all there is to it. I had a lot of fun making this video, talking with my family, reminiscing, doing this project really just filled me with warmth, and I hope it does the same to you guys. My grandparents had such a powerful love. It's inspiring. I'm just grateful to have been a witness to it. My family, my mom mostly, would always organize these adorable anniversary parties. Every marriage milestone my grandparents would hit, and it was always so much fun to be around the love. Like, forget Valentine's Day. This was real love. It wasn't commercial or forced or just there because. It was day in in, day out all the little things love. After becoming parents, my grandparents would pretty much exclusively call each other mom and dad. And funnily enough, my husband and I actually do that. I call him daddy, and no, not in the weird way, go away. And he calls me mama or mama bear. I will sometimes like jokingly call him by his full name, like when I'm like play scolding him when I go, Michael, but he almost never calls me Emily. When I hear him yell Emily, it can mean one of like a few things. DeBabes has had some form of accident, from tummy troubles to scribbling all over the walls. Osa has had some form of accident that is severe enough he needs an extra set of hands, or if there is an emergency like a pipe bursting causing a giant ominous water bubble to form in the lobby of our home. That was terrifying, like a giant house blister. But anyway, you guys get the point. My grandparents' love was steeped in compassion and respect, and my husband and I always try to uphold those really important traditions in our family, the same way that they did. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to stay out of trouble. See you guys later.
To know what is love. It doesn't have to be romantic, or it could be just platonic, familial.
It's respect. We love each other. Oh, Mom.